Each day over the past week, instead of giving you insights into the Torah portion, I've been focusing on the momentum up to the the feast of winter time, the feast of dedication, Hanukkah. And we talked about that last night in pretty broad strokes, but we got into some of the nitty gritty. And if there was one thing I would encourage you to do in the days ahead, take the time to go online or pull out your Catholic Bible and read the book of Maccabees. Read 1st and 2nd Maccabees. At minimum, at least read the first 5 chapters of 1st Maccabees. And think about society today. Has the faithful remnant of believers, the people who are calling themselves the children of God, in broad strokes, Methodist, Presbyterian, Baptist, Church of Christ, apostolic, Pentecostal, are we living in such a way to where we have become so assimilated into the world culture that nobody can distinguish the difference between us and a nice businessman who shakes your hand, who smiles, who holds the door for you, who picks up your lunch tab? Are we doing things in such a way that people go, their life is set apart, their life is consecrated, and they've got what I want? In the book of Maccabees, during that 400-year period between Malachi and Yeshua's arrival on the scene, that time period that's known as the silent years, that those silent years are really not silent. They were silent in regards to no prophets being around, but they were devastatingly loud, because through Assyria and the compromise of the Ephraimites and the lost 10 tribes, through the assimilation of Rome into their culture, to the priests no longer teaching the Torah, by the time Yeshua came on the scene, things were looking pretty grim. They were looking really grim, because what Yeshua desires more than anything else, and what Yahweh desires more than anything else, is that we would have a lifestyle that would resonate the truth of the altar. And as I shared with you last night, the altar is a structure which is dedicated to God's presence on the earth. The altar is very similar to God's mouth, and it's very similar to yours and my mindset and the way that we live our lives, whether it's the things we eat, whether it's how we occupy our time, whether it's how we approach the Lord. The altar, whether it's from Cain and Abel, or whether it's from Abram or Isaac or Jacob, or all the way through Scripture, it was always erected to say, we're establishing this moment in time with God's presence. And when the Maccabees broke down the temple altar because it had been desecrated, and they didn't want anybody to approach that again in a negative way, when Yeshua showed up on the scene in John chapter 10 at the Feast of Dedication, walking in Solomon's porch, where there was a large group of stones that had been there for many, 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 many years. Now Yeshua shows up at Hanukkah in the winter at this time, and he says, I'm here. Listen to my voice. Follow me. I'll show you how to walk. My prayer for myself personally has been that the words that come from my mouth, that the actions that come from my life would be so powerful with me being here in Stanton that people would say, I want what that guy's got, and in the surrounding areas. I'm always, and I think Nan can testify, and Joseph can testify, and Suzanne can testify, and Mariah can testify. While I'm here, I'm constantly outreaching to people, constantly sharing with people, meeting them where they're at, giving them something to think about, to consider, because I want them to see this is inside of me. This is part of who I am. And I want you to experience the same joy that I experienced. Doesn't mean that there's not challenges, trials, difficulties. But during this time, especially when stress is so high, I've got to buy presents. My finances are tight. We got to get a tree. We're meeting with family. We're meeting with in-laws, meeting with outlaws, meeting with children, meeting with, there's stresses that are involved in all of this. And I don't have to deal with those stresses. So my desire is to live in such a way that people recognize the shalom inside, and then they'll be open to more in the days ahead. Everything in life is perspective. Everything that we see in life, that we physically see and visibly see, it's more of an illusion than it is anything else. And that's why I sent to you this morning. Britt, I don't think I sent it to you. I need to send that to you, so I'm going to do that right now. I sent that picture of an illusion of the vase. And the vase is significant because it's got two faces on it. And what I want to help you understand this morning is something you already know. Life is about perspective. Now, in this Torah portion, there are many things that I need to know. For instance, Joseph the dreamer is introduced in the story. The relationship between Joseph's family and Joseph, butting heads, is revealed in the story. And we dealt with this on Monday night with misplaced anger. How oftentimes we misplace anger at the wrong place. Sometimes our anger that we displace in the wrong place is because we're angry at ourselves. So we displace it onto other people. Sometimes, like with the Joseph story, as we looked at in the book of Exodus, chapter 23, verse 4 on Monday night, sometimes our anger is misplaced and we take it out on an innocent bystander. And then we really meant it to be to somebody else, but we didn't know how to address it with the somebody else. Then there's the issue that we see in chapter 38 of Genesis, where, and this is probably the most important one that would be valuable to us. It's okay for us to confront somebody about their wrongdoing. In fact, the scripture encourages you to do so. But you need to do it in a particular way. And whenever you, and I find this consistently across the world, whenever I say, I'm sorry, or I compliment somebody over something, I always bring up the past event of something negative, or I self-justify myself in the midst of the reality of whatever's being addressed. In this week's Torah portion in Genesis 38 with Judah and Tamar, Judah doesn't blame anybody. Judah doesn't bring up wrongdoing. Judah says, I'm at fault. She's more righteous than I am. Leave it there. This is Judah's greatest moment in everything that he does in his life. Because up to this point, Judah has been a very, very proud, dominant figure within the family. And as a result of his mindset towards Joseph, the beginning of chapter 38 and the end of chapter 37, the scripture tells us, and Judah went down. Not only did he physically go down from the location he was at, but spiritually he went down into the eyes of his family. And his brothers didn't see him as the strong leader. And as we talked about last night, even before the study began, with he meets a certain man who's an Adullamite named Hira. And I broke the word down for you in Hebrew, an Adullamite, and explained to you that really what the Adullamite is about it's about pitching a tent, a place to dwell where the king can be revealed. That's what the Adullamite's really about. That's why it says a certain Adullamite. So when Judah even goes and he apparently makes a mistake by marrying an Adullamite woman rather than a woman who is converted to the faith of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, instead of him doing that, he marries outside of covenant, and then the children that they bear are not going to be fruitful. In fact, they're going to die. And where Judah, at one point in chapter 38, had treated Tamar, the daughter-in-law of his oldest son, who truly did err, when he died, and then he gave Onan to Tamar, and he died, Judah started treating Tamar like she was a black widow, a woman who, after she's consummated, she eats her spouse. And so Judah, in the story, he doesn't give Shelah to Tamar, though he promises. Tamar, a woman of integrity, she waits year after year after year after year after year for the promise of Shelah being brought to her so that she can raise up the name of her deceased husband. Tamar, and there's two in scripture, Tamar is an amazing woman. So when she is older and Shelah is completely grown and Judah doesn't give to her Shelah as a spouse because Judah in his mind has made up his mind that she's like a black widow, and that's my analogy. I can't give any of my sons. They die whenever they come to her. That's when Tamar, whose mind is thinking at a higher plane, she actually goes out, and when she hears that Judah is coming, she knows that there is a lineage that needs to come. And that lineage that needs to come in this relationship is going to produce a king. I believe that Tamar knows that there is something righteous. And even though she's not living out the Levirate marriage, in Hebrew it's called Yibum, Yibum. Yibum is when, and this is a Torah principle, it's still practiced in the Middle East and Asia today. When you have a brother, when you have a man who marries a woman and he dies without producing young, the brother comes in to the wife and marries her and conceives and raises up a name on behalf of the deceased individual. Similar to what Ruth did when Ruth lost her husband and she marries Boaz. She marries Boaz, who historically is way beyond her age, way beyond her age. But for the sake of raising up a name to her deceased husband, this is exactly what we're involved in our relationship with Yeshua. It's raising up a name of the deceased husband. So when you take these pictures in scripture, we have a tendency to want to say, oh, well, Tamar was acting like a harlot, and that's how the text describes her. But in actuality, that's not what she was doing. What she was doing was raising up a name for herself. And if we examine the story even more closely, because this morning is all about perspective and about looking at things from a certain vantage point, whether you're looking at it from the optical illusion, which was what magicians love to do. A magician, what he does is he wants you to look over here, but over here is where what he's really doing is happening. But he distracts you with something over here. And what's funny when it comes to magicians, which are optical illusions, when we pay people to trick us, we like it when people trick us. We will go to great shows just to be fooled, which kind of gets embedded in our psyche, which the enemy knows, if I can show you this, but really over here I'm doing this, then we become deceived by an illusion that's not real, but I'm being told that it's real. I was told that the economy is booming. I was told that all of the side effects of COVID really aren't COVID. I was told about the Ukrainian war. I was told that the Jewish people in Israel are genocidal maniacs. I've been told, I've been told an illusion, but the reality is over here. And what I want to encourage you this morning on this beautiful chilly willy morning here on December 21st from Stanton, Michigan, I want to encourage you to look beyond what you see. And that's what we begin this morning with our study. In chapter 37, what ends up happening is Joseph, as we talked about on Monday night, is coming to his brothers. His brothers see him afar off, and in the process of seeing him afar off, they say, let's kill the dude. And as they have that in their mind, then Reuben says, no, let's not do that. Let's throw him in a pit and let him die. Because Reuben has a mindset that he wants to, and my perspective is that Reuben's making up to his brother, Joseph, for the sin that he committed 10 years earlier with Bilhah going up to his father's bed. And he's doing penance for that. He's stepping out in the right place and he's doing the right thing, even though he's lost his birthright. And he knows that the father has now placed it upon Joseph. And Reuben is now saying, you know what? I blew it back then, but I'm going to do this now. Well, then what Judah says is Judah says, no, let's sell him. And so then there's an exchange that takes place between the Ishmaelites and the Midianites, and then eventually sold into Potiphar's house. There, the man who's in charge of everything for Pharaoh. So he's sold, and eventually, according at least to tradition, for 30 pieces of silver. In the process, there's something that happens. Now, I want to give you something to think about in relationship to this story in chapter 37. Time does not heal all wounds. That's first and foremost. That's an illusion. Time does not heal all wounds. However, if we look at this story, time does affect my perspective. I don't know if you've ever been raging mad before. I have been raging mad before. Raging mad to where I could have knocked somebody into next week. I have been on occasions in my life raging mad. Like, don't get near me, I'll kill you. Raging mad. That's not a boast. In time, that rage changes. Just as the brothers wanted to kill Joseph. Misplaced anger, which was meant for Jacob. They wanted to kill him. But a little time passed. And instead of them killing him, they said, well, let's throw him in a pit, which is less severe. And the pit didn't have any water in it. Water in Scripture is likened to the Torah. But according to the midrashes, there were snakes and scorpions in there. They didn't bite Joseph, which the snakes and the scorpions are all about creating division. That's what snakes and scorpions are in Scripture, is to create division, which will eventually bring forth death. So they go from killing the brother to no, we'll throw him in the pit, to eventually they say, well, let's sell him. You see what's happening with time? I told my children whenever they would get upset, I would have a fun game with them. I'd say, just count to 10. Your mind will change. Take a few deep breaths. Your mind will change. And if their mind didn't change, then I would send, usually Christopher was a part of the conflict, and Lauren and or Megan were part of the conflict. I would send them into one of their rooms, and I'd say, I wouldn't put them in timeout and put their nose in a corner. I'd send them to their rooms, even when they were knee-high to a grasshopper. And I'd say, when you guys get your act together and you figure out that you're brother and sister, then you can come out. And they would be in there, and within 10 minutes, they'd be laughing and giggling. Time doesn't heal all wounds, but time does change perspective. What would have happened if the Ishmaelites and the Midianites hadn't have come and taken Joseph out of the pit? What would have happened when Reuben came back to the pit and found that Joseph was gone? What would they have done if Joseph would have been pulled out of the pit by Reuben? Would he have been brought back to the brothers, or would he have taken that lost ox from Exodus 23:4 and taken him back to the owner, their enemy? What would have happened? I don't know. But I do know that time doesn't heal all wounds. Time often causes a fester. The junk needs to be cleaned out. You need to put nano silver or put something to be able to wipe out all of the bad pathogens that could infect it and allow it to heal. But it's got to be clean first. But time does change your perspective. And that perspective is important because the boys in chapter 37, when they find that Joseph is not there, they have to create an illusion in the eyes of their father because now they're up a creek without a paddle. They take Joseph's coat, literally his coats, one of favoritism and one of family, and they dip it in goat's blood. We've talked in years past about goats and coats, and we've talked about the significance of why with Isaac and Rebekah, Rebekah said to Jacob, take 2 kids of the goats and kill them. It was a picture vaulting us forward to Yom Kippur. When Tamar in chapter 38 says, give me a goat and give me your coat. In this chapter, chapter 37, where Judah gets a goat and dips the blood of the goat in the coat and tears the coat, and they take it back to Joseph. They take it back because they're trying to create an illusion that Joseph has been eaten by a wild animal. In Torah, God gives you a time frame to mourn over the loss of a spouse, loss over a child, the loss over your health. He gives you a time to mourn, 7 days. And then he gives you a 30-day period, and then a maximum of 1 year. What's strange about Jacob, also known as Israel, is he completely ignores the mourning time period when he hears about Joseph's apparent death. And he mourns for 22 more years. If an individual continues to keep mourning within the Hebraic mindset, it's because in the back of their mind, they still believe that individual's alive. There was an illusion presented, but in Jacob's mind, there was a reality. He said, I know this isn't real. And he lived mourning, knowing there was a day ahead when he'd be reunited with his son. And this is why he continued to mourn for all those years. And this is why when Benjamin and Jacob became so close and their souls were knit together. There are dynamics within the story of illusion and truth. The key is going to be perspective. Do I see things happening from the hand of God, or do I see things from the devil? Do I see the vase, or do I see the 2 faces looking at each other? Every event that takes place in your life, you have to have one of 2 perspectives. There are no other perspectives. Is this of God? And what is God teaching me? Not what is God teaching everybody else, what is God teaching me? And how can I learn from this moment? And what am I supposed to learn? And why is this happening? It's the difference between a blessing and a curse. It's still the same commandment. Proper perspective brings blessing. Improper perspective brings a curse. One perspective sees a vase. The other perspective sees 2 faces. Face to face. Panim. Seeing things the way that they are. It's all perspective. Everything's perspective. Time changes perspective. I find the older I get, 29 with 33 years of experience, at the age of 62, my perspective changes. My children at their age and my grandchildren, their perspective's changing. It's amazing. The older they get, the more dad knows. I don't know how that works, but perspective changes. I need to understand this in marriage. I need to understand this in family relationships. I need to understand it in the winter season. I need to understand it during the Moedim. I need to understand this in every interaction in life. Life is an illusion. See things from reality, and your perspective will always see things based on what you want to see. That's worth writing down. You will see what you want to see, what you've been conditioned to see. That's why we need to pray that the Father would give us eyes to see, ears to hear, a heart to perceive, and feet to walk, and seed to sow, and plants to water, and fruit to harvest, and seed to sow. And the cycle repeats over and over and over again, not living in an illusion. In chapter 37, the boys create the illusion. Jacob mourns, but Jacob doesn't do like what Esau did. What Esau did when he lost his birthright is he weeps bitterly. Jacob rends his clothes in verse 34. He puts on sackcloth. He mourns for his son many days, but you don't hear this wailing like we see with Jacob and Esau. We don't see the wailing like we do with Hagar and Ishmael. We don't see the wailing with Jacob and Rachel at the well. We see a man who has control. He has been presented with an illusion that this isn't good. Is he thinking about a future day of resurrection? Is he thinking about that my son's really not dead? This garment doesn't look like it was torn by an animal that ate my son. What's going through his mind? And it says, thus his father wept, which makes complete sense. And I shared with you last night the difference between somebody who lives based on the perceived character is they just always have to maintain that character, versus a person who knows who they are and they control their behavior in the midst of situations. And I shared with you how Abram is known as the man of mercy in Scripture. But yet I emphasize to you to go back and look at his life, and you'll find that there was times in his life where he didn't show mercy. You look at the life of Isaac and you say, Isaac was the man of judgment. But you'll find that through the life of Isaac, it wasn't all black and white. It was praying for his wife for 20 years. It was digging up wells. It was having compassion. It was the emotions. It was the boy living his laughter, Isaac. Jacob, the man of truth, that Scripture testifies he is the man of truth. But we look at his life and we say, well, it appears to be deception. The stronger and the more established I become in my faith, the more I know who I am, and I know what the situation calls for. I can control myself, or I can behave in such a way that handles the situation the way that it needs to be handled. But what I can't do is I can't go around self-justifying. I just have to become who God's calling me to be. And this is what the boys will have to deal with the next, literally, the next 22 years in the back of their mind. They're going to have to deal with this realization. But in time, God's going to change their perspective by bringing a drought, by bringing a famine. And he's going to raise up Joseph in order to bring the family back together again. People may not have the same perspective of you at that moment, but in time, perspectives change, which open up the door to be able to administer truth to help people grow. And I'm talking about me. In chapter 39, I want to express to you something about the life of Joseph. I need to understand that from chapter 37, from the time that the boys sell him to the Ishmaelite traders, the Midianite traders, he's sold into Potiphar's house. The boys never sold him, but they were participants in the crime because that was their desire. And so Yahweh said, we'll use the Ishmaelites, we'll use the Midianites. Well, here come the Ishmaelites, they take them up. Here come the Midianites, we're going to sell Ishmaelites to the Midianites, Midianites to Potiphar. And the boys don't know. And listen very carefully with your heart open the deepest way. This could be the most profound truth. This literally could be the most profound truth that I maybe ever shared with you, ever. And the Lord just reminded me, I've shared it with you in times past, but I'm going to share it right now. Understand that Judah and all of the brothers who were participating in this, there was a 10 that were participating in this event against Joseph. When they sold their dad a bill of goods, that this event, your son, your favorite son, has been eaten by wild animals, the boys don't know what happened to Joseph. They really don't know. And Joseph really doesn't know what his father knows. And Joseph doesn't know what his brothers did. You say, so what's your point? This is a problem I have to deal with in my own mind. I haven't seen Betty Sue in 10 years. The last event that I had with Betty Sue was horrible. The next time I see Betty Sue, boom, instantaneously, my mind goes back to 10 years ago. Boom, the emotion, the anger, the frustration, everything goes back to Betty Sue. What I don't understand, I wonder what's happened to Betty Sue over the past 10 years. I wonder what's happened to Joseph. I wonder what Dad's thinking about me being gone. Why hasn't Dad sent a search party out for me? Maybe Dad doesn't care about me. Maybe Dad doesn't really love me. He showed favoritism to me. Maybe that's why Dad sent me out to go check on the brothers, because he wanted me to be killed by my brothers. Can you see what happens when our mind plays the illusion? rather than saying in our minds, it's been 10 years since I've seen Betty Sue. Betty Sue, it's been a long time. I remember the last time that I saw you, we didn't have a pleasant situation. But boy, how time changes things. I need to tell you, God's been doing a bunch in my life. And whatever I did 10 years ago to be a pain in your hoochie coo, I am so sorry. What's been happening with you over the past 10 years? We're not the same people that we were. Or I could have the different mindset. Oh, that Betty Sue, she hasn't changed since high school. Oh, that Betty Sue. Probably the most important thing I could ever tell you is while you're not with that person, God's still working in the life of that person. You cannot project the past into the present without considering God's work. Now, if Betty Sue is worse and uglier and nastier than ever, then I'll keep my distance. But I can't project the past into the present when that's not the reality. I haven't seen somebody for 2 weeks. I wonder what God's been doing in their life. We live an illusion in our mind. We see what we want to see. We don't respond according to how God has been potentially working behind the scenes. Why did so and so die? Why and so get sick? Why did this happen? Why did that happen? Why did I end up getting a flat tire here? Why did this accident happen like this? Your perspective, illusion. Joseph's been sold. He's been sold into Potiphar's house. Let's pick up in chapter 39. And Joseph was brought down to Egypt. Now, for your notes, I'm going to give you something to write down. You've oftentimes heard the statement, what goes up must come down. But I'm going to reverse it for you. What goes down will always come up. What does that mean? See, Joseph was brought down to Egypt, a place of a constriction. It wasn't just a physical location, it was a place of constriction, a tight, narrow spot. And the purpose for this was for him to be humbled. Because Joseph did have a little bit of a arrogance inside of him. I'm daddy's favorite. My mind, every time I say something like that, my voice sounds like the girl on Charlie Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, and she turns into a big blueberry, Violet. Daddy, I want it now. My mind always goes back when my voice hits that certain thing. Well, back to our commercial, back to our program. Joseph says, I'm daddy's favorite. I had a dream. You all bowed down to me. The sun, the moon, and the stars. And of course, the boys hated him. They envied him. They were angry at dad, but they took it out on him. They misplaced their anger. Now Joseph is in Egypt. He's alive. He's not dead. But what's going on in his mind? Joseph doesn't know what's going on with the boys. Joseph doesn't know if the boys have come clean. Joseph doesn't know if the boys have told dad the true story. Joseph doesn't know whether Jacob's really involved in this process or no. There's so many unanswered questions, which I've been addressing with you all throughout the week, just saying, Hanukkah, unanswered questions, all these unanswered questions. But there's answers. But if I try to come up with an answer without knowing the fact, then I'll only see things from my perspective and I'll be living the life of an illusion. Now pay close attention to what happens. And Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him of the hands of the Ishmaelites. So there was two groups of people that bought him. The Midianites pulled him up. The Ishmaelites then sold him into the hands of Potiphar. The boys just thought it was the Ishmaelites, but the Midianites got there first, pulled him out, took advantage of it, purchased him, sold him to the Ishmaelites. Here come the Ishmaelites. I think I may have had that backwards earlier. And the Lord was, now pay close attention. Here's what I want to emphasize to you. The Lord was with Joseph. That's important. And Joseph knew it. Joseph knew it. The Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man. And he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. He's prospering in what he does. He takes the situation that he's in, and instead of him putting on a pouty face and a moody, tooty, fresh and pooty mindset, he says, okay, I'm in Egypt. I'm going to do what I need to do while I'm here in Egypt. Oh, I'm going to be in Potiphar's house. I'm going to become the best I can be for Potiphar while I'm here. Where are you? Where are you in your marriage? Where are you in your business? Where are you in your health? The Lord's with you. But the illusion might be, where is God in the midst of this? Where is he? Why would this be happening? So Joseph's prospering, and he's in the house of his master. And Joseph in the back of his mind's going, I'm not sure if Dad even loves me. But you know what? While I'm in this house of this other master, I'm going to give everything that I've got to make him prosper. And his master saw that the Lord was with him. So the way that Joseph was living his life was obvious in the midst of his situation of being sold by the Ishmaelites, who bought him from the Midianites, who the brothers wanted to sell him anyway. They see that the Lord is with him. How do they see that? Is he wearing a sign that says, I'm a believer? No, by his walk, by his mindset, by the way he carried himself during difficult times. You know, there's nothing like the bottom falling out to change your perspective on life. Nothing like it. I know. I've had the bottom drop out on multiple occasions, not by my choice, and on a couple of occasions, for sure, by my choice. Regardless of whether it's your choice or not your choice, how do you handle it? You can't dictate what's going on with your health, your marriage, but you can determine, because you can't make anybody do anything. You can only determine how you do. You can't fix your business partner. You can only determine how you're going to be. You can't change the world. You can only determine how you're going to be. But you can stand. And that stand is going to be something that's going to rub off on somebody else. And before you know it, President Trump's going to be in office. Because certain people refuse to give up. They didn't give in to the woke mentality. It's still out there, but it's weak compared to what it was, and it's fixing to be demolished. The question is, will we live the illusion that everything's good, or are we really going to buckle down in our lives spiritually? So notice that the Lord was with him in verse 2. Notice in verse 3 that his master sees that the Lord is with him. And the Lord made all that he did prosper in his hand. And Joseph found grace in his sight, and he served him, and he made him overseer of his house and all that he had put into his hand. Wow. And it came to pass from the time that he made him overseer in his house and over all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was upon all that he had in the house and in the field. So now, in time, blessings are manifesting over and over and over again because of everything that Joseph does in submitting, listen very carefully, in submitting to a pagan man. His boss, who's not a believer, but he lives in such a way that the presence of the Lord will be with him to influence his master, because you can't make somebody take out the trash, let alone change somebody. Joseph has a mindset, the Lord's with me. This is not a good circumstance, but I'm going to take advantage of being everything I can be. See, Judah wasn't that way in the previous chapter. Judah went down from his brothers before he came up at the end of the chapter. Judah ends up marrying a woman, having children. They die. Judah ends up going into Tamar during the Feast of Sheep Shearing, and then a time of great celebration. Judah is depressed. His relationship with his brothers is down. He goes into what appears to be a harlot, though, as we talked about last night, her face is not covered. He doesn't recognize that it's actually his daughter-in-law, Tamar, which expresses her incredible modesty that we talked about. And so he goes into her, and according to tradition, he actually stayed with her for 3 months. He didn't just go and do the hoochie coo PG-13 and then leave her. He gave to her his ring, his staff, and his coat, all symbols of the kingliness. He gave those to her. He was never able to find her and give the goat because he didn't know who it was that he was dealing with, because she was wearing a certain attire, not mourning. And the story has all of these allusions to it. But the illusions over a period of time changed his perspective. And when the time came for Judah to pass a judgment upon his daughter-in-law who has been playing the harlot, he's going to burn her according to Torah. And she comes out and says, who does this ring belong to? Who does this staff belong to? Who does this cloak belong to? He's the father. Jacob has to deal with one of two things. Judah has to deal with one of two things. I could actually put her to death and nobody would know. But time has changed his perspective. And he comes clean. And he rises up after he's gone down. And he rises up and he says, I'm guilty. I'm the father. She's more righteous than me. And out of that came what? 2 children, Perez and Zerah, who produced King David. What happens when your perspective changes and you become unclean and you esteem somebody and you don't find fault in them? You don't give a backhanded compliment only to cut them down. What happens? When he says, she's more righteous than me, I was wrong. Not, you know, she's more righteous than me, she shouldn't have played the harlot 3 months ago. she's more righteous than me. What happens? Fruit comes forth. Twins come forth. A godly line comes forth. I'm the father. And what an amazing story of Perez and Zerah. So now, if you continue to keep reading in chapter 39, it says, verse 6, and he left all that he had in Joseph's hand. And he knew not, there was nothing that he didn't have that wasn't given to Joseph, except the bread he did eat. And Joseph was a goodly man and well favored. What does this mean? It means that he was a handsome man with an incredible body. That's what it means. But there was more to Joseph than just a handsome man with a perfect body. There was character on the inside. And this is the reason, because he was a handsome guy and because he was well favored, this is why Mrs. Potiphar every day was grabbing a hold of him, because Potiphar was a eunuch. And Mrs. Potiphar was not getting her needs met, her conjugal rights, from Exodus chapter 21. And she sees this young, virile 18-year-old and says, I want that man. And day after day after day, that beautiful man with the perfectly chiseled body is being desired by this woman. And it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph, and she said, lie with me. But he refused. Now, I've shared with you in previous years that if you were looking at a Chumash or you were looking at a Hebrew scroll, there's a shashelet. There's a lightning bolt over that statement where it says, and he refused. And you'll say, what is that lightning bolt? And in my Bible, I've even drawn a lightning bolt over the word he refused. What is that shashelet? It's a mark in scripture which says, oh, what am I going to do? What do I going to do? How should I handle this situation? Mrs. Potiphar's probably not a two-bag woman. A two-bag woman is a woman who's so ugly, she wears two bags that if the wind blows one off, she's still got one on there. That's ugly. She probably wasn't an ugly woman. Hope that didn't offend you. There is a truth that she would have been incredibly beautiful. And Joseph is incredibly handsome. And every day he sees her. And every day, because this is a continuous tense, she's doing this every day. She is doing this and he's going, what do I do? Nobody would ever know. I could do this behind the scenes. Nobody will ever find out. What do I do? Shashelet. And he said unto his master's wife, behold, my master. King James says, wotteth not what is with me in the house. And he has committed all that he has into my hand. He's given me everything in this house. There's none greater in this house than me. Neither than he kept back anything from me, but you, because you are his wife. How can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? He didn't say, how can I do this great wickedness and sin against Potiphar? How can I do this sin and actually sin against you, Mrs. Potiphar? How can I sin against Egypt? How can I sin against God who's with me, who has blessed me, who my master has seen that the Lord is with me? How can I do this against God? Now notice that it says that the Lord was with him. The Lord was with him. But now he uses, how can I do this against God? God is the term of judgment, the black and the white, the one who sees all things. How can I do that against him? Which would be a great concept for me to grab in my mind. How could I do this and sin against God versus your spouse or your family or a business partner? Or how could I do that against God? And it came to pass, as she spoke to Joseph day by day, that he didn't listen to her, to lie by her, or to be with her. This takes you forward all the way to the book of Esther with Mordecai. And it came to pass, because the boys kept saying to Mordecai, why aren't you going to bow down? And Haman would say in chapter 3, verse 4, he'd say, you should bow down to me. You should bow down to me every day, every day, every day, every day, every day. And Mordecai's going, I'm not going to bow down to any man. Only God. Only God I bow my knee to. There's coming a day where you and I will have to face the fiddler. Our government system is going to say you have to bow the knee. The question will be, will we? There will come an opportunity where you're going to have an opportunity to cash in your chips and to compromise. And to compromise the Lord being with you and the Lord's blessing upon you. You'll say, yeah, but I feel like I'm in Egypt. So what are you doing with your situation? Are you living the illusion or are you living a reality? What's your perspective? Came to pass that this time Joseph went into the house to do his business. There was none of the men of the house that were in the house. He was all alone. Mrs. Potiphar. It's a big house. It's not like the cottage where I can be in my bedroom and somebody can hear me in the kitchen. I mean, this is a palace. It's big. Nobody's going to know. He's coming in to use the bathroom. Why didn't he just do it in the garden? He came in. And as he comes in, it comes to pass when she saw that he had left his garment in, verse 12. And she caught him by his garment, saying, lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand, and he fled and got him out. This is the second time that Joseph's lost his garments. The first time his garments were stripped from him. This time, he's stripped of his garments by his choice. The first one wasn't by his choice. And here he is. But he maintains who he is. And he flees. Garment in her hand, and she called to the men of her house and spoke unto them, saying, see, he has brought in a Hebrew unto us to mock us. He came in unto me to lie with me. I cried with a loud voice. How'd she know he was a Hebrew? He was sold by the Ishmaelites. How did she know he was a Hebrew? One who had crossed over, one who lives differently than the world, one who doesn't like an Egyptian, one who doesn't act like a Roman, one who doesn't act like the world. How'd she know? Because the Lord was with him. In Egypt, they knew the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They knew who he was. And it came to pass when he heard, I lifted up my voice and cried, and he left his garment out with me, and he fled, and he got him out. And she laid up his garment by her unto and his Lord came home. And she spoke to him according to these words, saying, the Hebrew servant which you have brought unto us came in to mock me. And it came to pass, as I lifted up my voice and cried, that he left his garment with me and fled out. There's a very valuable life lesson here, an incredibly valuable life lesson. Because Joseph is going to be confronted by his master. And I want you to notice what Joseph doesn't do. What he doesn't do is he doesn't self-justify himself. He doesn't say, but look at how I've been in your house. Look at my life. Look at the blessing. When he gets accused, and it came to pass, verse 19, when his master heard the words of his wife, which she spoke unto him, saying, after this manner did your servant to me, that his wrath was kindled. And Joseph's master took him and put him into a prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound, and he was there in prison. Now, I've got a question for you. Did Joseph deserve this? Nope. Joseph fled his master's wife because he was showing allegiance to his master. A pagan master. And to God. He was loyal to his master. And even though everything was falling apart around him, and there's no discussion, there's no interaction, there's no Joseph self-justifying himself. There's no saying, you know, your wife, well, if you weren't a eunuch, well, you know, but I have, look at what, we have no commentary. He's delivered down into a prison. And he's put there with all the prisoners. Now look at verse 21. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. You say, holy schmoles, what's going on here? Joseph sold by the Ishmaelites into Potiphar's house. He says, okay, I can't determine my circumstances, but I can sure determine how I'm going to handle them. I don't know what my dad's thinking. I don't know what my brothers are doing. I don't know what's going on there. And they don't know what's happening with me. They think I might be dead. What is my dad thinking? I don't know. I'm not going to allow my imagination to run wild. I'm not going to be having illusions in my mind. I'm going to deal with the reality and I'm going to do the perspective. I'm here. I'm going to make the best of it. I'm going to honor God. And the Lord was with him and showed him mercy. And he found favor in prison and elevated him to where he was in charge within the prison. Why? Because of his perspective, the Lord was with him. Verse 22, and the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hands all the prisoners that were in the prison. And whatever they did, there he was the doer of it. Joseph said, it's time for us to exercise, boys. It's time to go to bed. Lights out. It's time for this. It's time for chow. It's time for this. And they did it. Because the Lord was with him by the way that he walked out the situations. The keeper of the prison looked not to anything that was under his hand because the Lord was with him. And that which he did, the Lord made it to prosper. And how ironic that the Lord, who now has placed, now notice it's the term Lord because that's the covenant-keeping, merciful, personal, relational God. That's the title. Yahweh, Yod-He-Vav-He. That's the covenant-keeping term. God is the term for the this is how it is. It's black and white. And the Lord was with him. Even in the midst of ugly, yucky circumstances. Did Joseph deserve to be sold? Maybe. But the Lord was with him. He may have been thinking while he was in that pit. He may have been thinking when he was taken out by the Midianites and sold to the Ishmaelites and sold from the Ishmaelites to Potiphar, he may have been saying, remembering all the life lessons that he learned underneath his father Jacob from Isaac and from Abraham that had been passed down from Shem, he probably was thinking, okay, there's a certain way to deal with things in life. There's things I have no control over. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that I live in a way that the people who see my life are going to recognize, wow. It doesn't mean that his bank account was full. It doesn't mean anything. It just means that the people who came in contact with him, they were blessed. And their lives were impacted because the Lord was with them. And the Lord was with him and put him in the right spot. The right spot that within chapter 40, a baker and a butler who are working for Pharaoh get chunked into the prison. And then they have a dream. And what's ironic about this is Joseph greets them and says, "Hi, boys, how you doing?" Joseph's in prison. But yet his true, genuine heart is not living based on an illusion. It's living based on reality. A different perspective makes all the difference in the world. So what ends up taking place? These boys get put in and he goes, "You look like you're having a rough day." Joseph looks like he's been having a rough 11 years because he will be in prison for 13. These boys are delivered to him in 11 years in prison, and he recognizes, I'm here. There's nothing I can do to change it. I'm here. So he takes who he is and he ministers to these men who are troubled with their dreams. And the difference between the baker and the butler is the difference between somebody who's elevated back to his position versus somebody who's not. And the difference between the two is the one who acts quickly, the butler, versus the baker who acts slowly. And the 3 days are significant. After 3 days, you'll be restored. After 3 days, your head will be lopped off. You'll be put to death. The 3 days takes us to the book of Hosea, and it takes us to chapter 5 and chapter 6, that after 2 days, on the third day, God will raise us up again. After 2 days after Yeshua's death, on the third day in the Messianic era, there will be individuals who are restored and there'll be individuals who are not. This is the faithful message that Yeshua taught in almost every one of his parables. Be faithful, look forward to the coming kingdom. Be unfaithful, look forward to it being like the baker. Joseph is a picture of Yeshua. The baker and the butler, they happen to be the servants of the Most High of the world, Pharaoh, who is going to adopt Joseph. And Joseph's gladly going to receive that in next week's Torah portion. Why? Why didn't Joseph write home and say, "Dad, I'm okay. I'm in Egypt"? It's amazing what goes on in the back of our minds. They don't love me. They don't talk to me. They don't give me enough time. It's amazing what happens in the imagination of our minds. It's funny how we pay to go see a magician deceive us with illusion. It's amazing. And I'm not telling you I don't love it. I'm amazed at the sleight of hand. That could be one of my downfalls for sure. Though I don't do magic. illusions. And anyway, the fact of the matter is, this Torah portion has more illusions and perspective in it than we can shake a stick at. The takeaway for me towards you guys today is stop and think about who you are, where you are, and who is with you. And then live in such a way that everybody around you knows that he's with you. Don't make excuses. Don't point out flaws. Take responsibility. Change your perspective. You have to go down before you can come up. Ask Judah. Ask Joseph. And watch to see Yahweh do good things. Well, let me end the call, and we'll take some comments and some questions. Wishing you a wonderful Shabbat.